What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Swift tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be talking about associated values in enumerations in Swift, of course. And basically, we're here on the Swift documentation website on enums, and we're in the associated value section, obviously. And basically, an associated value is a way where you can, kind of like the name implies, associate a value with a case in an enum. So the example that they have really verbosely explained here is assume that you have an enum that represents two different barcode types. One is like this one, and one is like this normal QR code. And each of them has a different value. In this case, we have a 1D value for these characters down here. And in this case, you have some type of UPC value. You can still use one enum with two cases and pass in the value respectively for both types. So they're super easy to use, they're super interesting, and they're pretty common too. Pretty commonly come up in interview questions as well, so I figured I'd do a quick video on it. That said, make sure you smash that like button down below for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Like I said in my last video, I noticed over 70% of you that consistently watch these videos are not subscribed, so let's get that subscribe count up so I can make more of these for all of you. Get Xcode ready, get excited, and let's jump right in. Quick pause before we get into the video. If you haven't seen it already, I am hard at work putting together iOSacademy.io, a community where all of us iOS engineers can come together, learn how to build some of the top apps like Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, in addition to interview prep to land some of these iOS roles at top tech companies. So if you're interested in the free and premium content to come, head on over to iOSacademy.io and enter your email address in the waitlist form, and you will be notified as content becomes available. That said, let's get into the video. All right, so we're going to get started by creating a playground here in Xcode. And we'll stick with the blank playground for now. We can leave the default name. And we'll take a look at some fundamentals here before we jump on into a project and look at a more real-world application of associated values in enums. So let me go ahead and start by expanding my Xcode window here to give ourselves a little more room to work. Let me also zoom in for all of you. And let's take a look at this. So first and foremost, let's create a basic enum. So let's say we had an enum that represented different states that an airplane is in. So let's call it airplane state. And an airplane could be parked, it could be flying, it could be being serviced. Let's call it servicing. Let's call another one retired, if it's like old or whatever. So we have these four states here, and this is a pretty basic enum. And of course, if we wanted to use it, we could do something along the lines of the following. And we can assign one of these enumeration values to it. So basically this enum is pretty straightforward and it represents just states. But what if we wanted to also pass along additional information about the plane for which this state is applicable? So one approach is you could add a property in here. Let's just call it plane model. And it could be a string, and you can switch on self. And basically you can have all of these cases in here, like that. Let's go ahead and put that dot in there. And for each of these, you can return some string as follows. So this is one way you can do it. But the problem with this approach is you kind of have to hard code the various things you want to return for each state, and it's not really configurable and dynamic. So this is where we can bring in associated values. And I personally am a big fan of this feature of Swift, and I use it quite often. And it's kind of what it sounds like. Each of these cases in the enum can have an associated value. So we can say if you call the parked case in the enum, you need to also pass in a airplane type, and it's going to be a string, right? So now if we ever say here parked, you'll see in the autocomplete it actually tells you that you need to pass in a string. So we can actually come in here and pass in like Boeing 747, right? And let's actually add the same airplane type associated value to each of these. Now, what's cool about this is wherever the caller that passes in this enum lives, let's say you pass in this enum value of state to some function. Let me actually do that. So let's create a function, do something, and we're going to pass in a state. What we can do now is we're going to call do something and pass in our state. And in here, let's say we want to see which state we have, and based on which state we have, we're going to do various things. So we can say parked, and if you look at that, it actually doesn't give you the proper autocomplete because Xcode decides to not be helpful. But what we could do is you can actually print out the associated value that's coming through. And this is actually going to yell at me because we need to bring in the other cases. So to avoid that error, we're going to bring in unknown default. Let's spell unknown correctly. Control I to fix that indentation. And let's go ahead and just print other in that case. So if we come down to the very bottom here and we open up our console, let me bring this up a little bit, and we hit this run button, this play button, you'll see that we get the Boeing 747 printed out. So we're actually not passing in a string, we're passing in our enumeration case, the state in this case, but we're also able to pass in this associated value. And you can quickly begin to see why this is really powerful, because you can use a state and pass in some dynamic value with it. And oftentimes it's more indicative of how things are in the real world, right? So if you've seen my prior video on results, or even if you haven't, what you could do in theory, if you wanted to have a way to represent a state of success and failure, and I'm going to do my result since the result is built into Swift. What Apple went ahead and did is they created success, and let's say you pass back some data, so you can have like value, and in the failure case, they did case failure, and you can pass back your error. So what this now gives you the flexibility to do is, let's say you go ahead and make an API call, and you want to return some data. Instead of returning optional or having different data for each time, you can go ahead and simply return either success or failure. And respectively, you can pass in either some value that you expected to get back. So we can pass in something like a string. Or if you had a failure case, you can go ahead and pass in, I think we need to do swift.error. We can pass in one of these errors. Anyways, there's a bunch of errors in here, which I can't remember clearly at the moment, but you can pass in an error. So the point here that I really want to bring home is, or drive home is, associated values are really powerful to associate values with enumeration cases. So before we hop into an Xcode project, one thing I'll call out is you can have enums. Well, traditionally, you can have an enum with raw values. So let's say we have something that's country. We let it conform to string, and we have USA, Canada, and Italy. And then let's say we do like foo is country.canada. And if we print out foo.raw value, we should get just that Canada printed out since we didn't give it a string. Let's try that one more time. There's Canada, and then here, if we make this explicitly be like B, you'll see we get B down there. So the point of me showing you guys this is when you have a enum with associated values, you cannot have it be raw representable. Once you put it up there for a string or integer or whatever you want to have a raw value be, it'll give you an error. And the reason is because the enum is basically saying, well, hey, you have these two cases here, but they also take in these associated values. So what the heck should the raw value be? Because it can't be static because these two things are kind of configurable. So a good workaround to this, because sometimes you inevitably need a raw value, is you should override the description, which I believe is a part of string representable or raw representable. There it is. There's a description in here that you should override. Actually, you don't even need raw representable. I take that back. What you could just simply do is add a description. And you can say success. Whoops, you want to switch self. And in this case, in the success case, you could return like success. And then in the failure case, of course, you can return failure. And what's even better about this approach, and I actually do think description is a part of one of the protocols that I can't remember at the moment. In the case of the failure, obviously we want to do let error. And the cool thing about this approach is, and what I like is, see here it's complaining we're getting the value but not using it. You could actually even make your descriptions be dynamic. So based on whatever associated type you do get back, you can use that in your description for the string if it decides to autocomplete correctly. And give that a quick second. It should go away. So now let's say we create like foo, and it is my results.success, where the success value is, let's say, some string. And I go ahead and print out foo.description. Basically, it serves the same purpose if it decides to run, where, all right, looks like we have an error somewhere in here. Let's see, error. Oh, it's because I spelled this wrong. Let's try that one more time. So basically, the purpose it serves is we can get a raw static value for success or failure, and we can also append in the associated value that we're getting in our actual enumeration case. So that's a quick primer on this stuff. So let's hop into an Xcode project and see how you can practically use this. And I have two examples that I want to run through. I think both of them are pretty realistic, and I've actually used both of them in real production applications. Let's close up that playground and let's do a Command-Shift-N to create a new project. We'll stick with a single view application, and I'm gonna call this my enums. Sure, let's go ahead and save this on our desktop. And let's first and foremost pick a simulator over here. Sure, this one works. Let me hit this run button. And while it's doing that, let's go to our view controller. So the very first one that I'd like to do, did I not hit run? There we go. Oh no, I hit it. The very first one that I'd like to do, once the simulator decides to load, there it goes, has to do with my prior series on creating a real-time chat application. So if you've seen that, this will probably be more something you've seen already. But if you haven't seen that, basically in a chat app, a user can send a variety of kind of messages. So a user can send a photo message, a user can send a text-based message, location, video, etc., etc. And one way you could model that data is you could have a struct for each of those message types. So here we have a photo message. We could obviously add one for a text message, and so on and so forth. But a quick problem with that you'll quickly see is it's a little verbose. So it's not incorrect by any means, but maybe a better way we could do it is by using an enumeration. So if we have an enumeration of message type, we can put in here the various types of messages that we expect. So the first one could be text, the next one could be photo, the next one could be audio, let's do location, let's do video, and let's stick with these. So this enumeration now represents all of the different message types that we support, but the associated values we can add now give us the ability to actually pass in the message data based on what type of message we're sending. So for the photo, we're going to want an image, UI image. For the audio, we're going to probably want a URL to the audio file. For the location, we're going to want a location, and that location object is a part of core location. So I'm going to go ahead and import that up there. Kind of irrelevant about core location in this video, but just so we can get this symbol, we need to import that. And similarly for the video, we can also use a URL. So now wherever somebody in our application, whatever controller wants to create one of these messages, they basically are going to say a message is a message type, and it's not only the enum value for what type they want to send, but it's also the associated data. So if we wanted to send a text-based message, we would basically create a .text and pass in that string. And once again, if you've seen my chat app series, which I think a lot of you guys have, this will look very familiar. And this is exactly what a lot of the open source community frameworks do for this message type object that I've created here, and a lot of just kind of representation in general where you have various cases with associated objects and values. So that's the first example that I wanted to show that you could use in a practical application. The other one is an example that Apple has already built, and we briefly looked at it in the playground, and that is using a result. So you've probably seen me use this in prior videos too, and I think I have a dedicated video on it, but let's take a look at what it is. So let's say we had a function called getData, and in here we wanted to use a URL session, and we're going to use the fetch data task with URL off of here. Basically, it just gets some data from an API with a network call. Kind of irrelevant for this video, but bear with me. So let's say we do data task with a URL. Just pass in some random URL. And completion has data, URL response, and an error. So here what we can say is we can say data, response, error in. And let's say that this getData itself had a completion handler. And it needs to be escaping because we're going to go inside of a different scope. And this completion handler is we're going to want to basically return what we get from the network call. So one approach to doing this is you could return data optional. Basically, if we get data back, it succeeded, otherwise it failed. It's definitely valid, but it's a little bit of a dirty solution. And the reason is every call site now has to check if the parameter is non-nil. I think a better way we could represent this is by using Apple's result type. And a result is a wrapper off of an enum with a success and failure case. We need to tell it in the success case we want data, and in the failure case we want an error. And this is a far cleaner way to represent this. And this is complaining because we created this task here and we never called tasks.resume, which kicks off the actual fetch request, the data task. So just go ahead and add that to get rid of the warning. But now what we can do in this closure, this completion for the data task itself, is we can say something like guard let data equals data, aka we got some data back, and in that case we can call our completion and pass in success, which if you look at it, it's an enum and it takes in our data because that's what we told it up here, and we can simply pass in that data. And in this case we can also call completion, but now we can pass in our failure and we can pass in an error. So I'm going to quickly add another enum here and have it conform to error. Just making our own error here. And here we can say is the error that we want to pass in is my error. That's some error. And now from the call side, if we go ahead and try to call this getData function, and we have this completion handler, you can notice the thing that we're returning is just one result and nothing is optional. So we can say result in. Now result is an enum, so we have to do switch on results. And there is a success case, and in this case we expect to get our data back. And there is a failure case, and we expect to get our error back. And we can simply print out the error or the data in both cases, and this way we'll get the actual value. So the benefit of this is we don't need to check if something is nil. We don't have to deal with optionality. We know the exact type that we expect back because that's what we put in the signature. And it's just a far easier thing in terms of readability. It's cleaner, it's more concise, and it makes more sense of, okay, if something succeeded, go here. If it failed, go here. So that is basically the quick example that I wanted to go over, the quick 2 examples. So if you guys enjoyed the video and haven't smashed that like button already, make sure to do so for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video as well, and if you haven't done so already, helps me make more videos for all of you. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions. I try to reply to every single comment within a few days. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.